The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the quiet streets of a small town. Marcus Johnson tightened his grip on the strap of his backpack as he walked briskly along the sidewalk. The night air was cool, and the distant hum of cars passing by was the only sound breaking the silence. At 17 years old, Marcus was already used to late nights. Between school, his part-time job at the diner, and helping out at home, free time didn't come easily for him. But tonight, something felt different. As he turned onto Maple Street, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Across the road, near an abandoned warehouse that had been boarded up for years, a white van was parked under the dim glow of a street lamp. Two men stood beside it, their figures illuminated faintly by the light. One of them held a clipboard, while the other loaded heavy crates into the back of the vehicle. Their actions were hurried but deliberate, like they were trying to finish before anyone noticed them. Marcus slowed down, his curiosity piqued. What were these guys doing here? The warehouse had been empty for as long as he could remember, and no one ever came around this part of town after dark. He glanced around, checking if anyone else was nearby, but the street was deserted. His heart began to race. Something about the scene didn't sit right with him. Without thinking too much, Marcus pulled out his phone and snapped a few pictures from where he stood. He zoomed in closer to get a better look at the crates being loaded. They looked plain enough, wooden with some kind of marking stamped on the sides. But there was something odd about the way the men handled them. It wasn't just their speed. It was the care they took, almost as if whatever was inside needed to be protected. Suddenly, one of the men glanced in Marcus's direction. Startled, Marcus ducked behind a parked car, his breath quickening. Had they seen him? He waited a few seconds, peeking cautiously over the hood. The man seemed to shrug it off and went back to loading the van. After what felt like an eternity, the two climbed into the front seats and the van drove off, disappearing into the night. Once the coast was clear, Marcus exhaled deeply. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through the photos he'd taken. Even though he couldn't make out all the details, the images confirmed what he'd witnessed. Whatever those men were up to, it wasn't legal. That much he was sure of. The next morning, Marcus sat at the kitchen table staring at his phone. He hadn't slept well, his mind replaying the events of the previous night over and over again. Finally, he decided he had to do something. If nothing else, reporting what he saw might help prevent trouble later. Grabbing his jacket, he headed to the local police station. The station wasn't far from his house, just a short bus ride away. As he stepped inside, the smell of stale coffee and polished floors greeted him. A receptionist looked up from her desk, raising an eyebrow at the teenager standing nervously in front of her. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone polite but detached. "I need to report something," Marcus said, clutching his phone tightly. "Something suspicious." The receptionist pointed him toward a door marked Captain's Office. Hesitant but determined, Marcus knocked lightly before entering. Inside, a middle-aged man with graying hair sat behind a cluttered desk. His nameplate read Captain Harold Mitchell. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "What can I do for you, son?" Mitchell asked, leaning back in his chair. Marcus explained everything. The van, the men, the crates, and the photos he'd taken. He showed the captain the images on his phone, pointing out the details he thought were important. For a moment, Mitchell listened intently, nodding occasionally. But as Marcus finished speaking, the captain's demeanor shifted. "You say you saw this last night?" Mitchell asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied firmly. "I'm pretty sure it wasn't normal." Mitchell sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, kid, we get reports like this all the time. Most of them turn out to be nothing. People see things in the dark and jump to conclusions." "But I have proof," Marcus protested, holding up his phone again. "You can check the location, the timestamp, it's all there." The captain waved a hand dismissively. "Even if we did investigate, it'd be a waste of resources. We're stretched thin as it is, unless you've got solid evidence linking this to actual criminal activity. There's not much we can do." Marcus felt a surge of frustration bubbling inside him. "So, you're just going to ignore it? What if someone gets hurt because of this?" Mitchell leaned forward, his tone Sharpening. Listen, son, I appreciate your concern, but we don't have the manpower to chase every hunch that comes through the door. Trust me, if it's serious, we'll hear about it sooner or later. With that, the conversation ended. Mitchell thanked Marcus for coming in but made it clear that no action would be taken. Defeated, Marcus left the station, his mind racing with questions. Why hadn't the captain taken him seriously? Was it because he was young? Or was it because he was black? Little did Marcus know, Captain Mitchell had another reason for brushing him off, a reason neither of them could have anticipated. Baking. In his office, Mitchell sipped his coffee, already forgetting about the teenager who'd visited him earlier. What he didn't realize was that Marcus's father, Elijah Johnson, was one of the biggest donors to the police department's recent funding initiatives. Elijah's contributions had helped keep the struggling department afloat during tough economic times, and while Elijah had always hoped his donations would improve community relations, he had no idea how deep-seated issues within the system continued to affect people like his own son. As Marcus walked home, anger and disappointment weighed heavily on his shoulders. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd done everything right but still been dismissed because of who he was. Little did he know, this encounter would set off a chain of events that would change not only his life but the entire town. For now, though, Marcus resolved to take matters into his own hands. If the police wouldn't listen, maybe he could find another way to uncover the truth. Marcus stormed out of the police station, his fists clenched and his jaw tight. He couldn't believe what had just happened. The captain hadn't even tried to take him seriously. It was like everything Marcus had said, everything he'd seen, didn't matter at all. He felt a mix of anger, frustration, and helplessness swirling inside him. As he walked down the steps of the station, he pulled out his phone again and stared at the photos he'd taken. The images were clear enough to show the van, the men, and the crates. Why wasn't anyone willing to look into it? By the time he got home, his best friend Jamal Carter was already waiting for him on the porch. Jamal was leaning against the railing, scrolling through his phone, but he looked up when Marcus approached. "Hey, man," Jamal said, noticing the tense expression on Marcus's face. "What's up? You look like you're about to explode." Marcus sat down heavily on the steps beside Jamal and let out a long sigh. "I went to the police station this morning," he began, his voice low. "I told them about what I saw last night. The van, the guys loading those crates, everything, but they didn't care. The captain acted like I was wasting his time." Jamal frowned, his brow furrowing. "Wait, you actually went to the cops? What did you expect, Marcus? They don't listen to people like us." "I know that now," Marcus muttered bitterly. "But still, shouldn't they at least check it out? What if something bad happens because they ignored it?" Jamal shook his head, his tone softening. "Man, you can't count on them to do the right thing. If they cared, things around here wouldn't be so messed up. You should have just left it alone." "But I didn't leave it alone," Marcus snapped, his frustration spilling over. "And now I feel like I'm stuck. If the police won't do anything, then who will?" Jamal hesitated, glancing at Marcus thoughtfully. Maybe we could do something ourselves." Marcus blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we've got your photos, right? And you said you noticed some weird markings on those crates. What if we figure out what they mean? Maybe there's a way to trace where they came from or who owns them." Marcus considered this for a moment. It sounded risky, but Jamal was right. They couldn't just sit back and do nothing. "Okay," Marcus said finally, nodding. "Let's try it, but we need to be careful. If those guys are involved in something illegal, they're not going to appreciate us poking around." "Don't worry," Jamal replied with a grin. "We'll stay low-key. No one will even know we're looking." Meanwhile, back at the police station, Captain Harold Mitchell was sitting in his office sipping a cup of coffee as he reviewed some paperwork. His conversation with Marcus earlier that day barely crossed his mind. It was just another routine interaction, one of many he dealt with daily. But when Detective Lisa Monroe knocked on his door and stepped inside, things started to shift. Lisa was one of the department's most experienced officers, known for her sharp instincts and dedication to justice. She often clashed with Mitchell, over how cases were handled, especially when it came to reports involving minority communities. Today was no exception. "Captain," Lisa began, closing the door behind her. "I heard you spoke to a kid earlier about suspicious activity near the old warehouse on Maple Street. Can I ask why nothing's being done about it?" Mitchell sighed, setting his coffee mug down. "It's exactly what I told him, Lisa. We don't have the resources to chase every wild goose that comes our way. Besides, kids see things all the time and blow them out of proportion." Lisa crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. "That's not what I heard. From what I understand, this kid had photos and specific details. That doesn't sound like a wild goose to me." "He's just a teenager," Mitchell replied dismissively. "Even if he did see something, it's probably nothing serious. You know how these things go." Lisa frowned, her patience wearing thin. "With all due respect, Captain, ignoring credible leads isn't going to help anyone, especially not when similar reports have come in recently. People are talking about strange activity around that warehouse. Doesn't that raise any red flags? For you?" Mitchell leaned back in his chair, clearly annoyed. "Look, Lisa, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we've got bigger problems to deal with. Unless there's concrete evidence linking this to actual criminal activity, I'm not wasting manpower on it." Lisa opened her mouth to argue further, but stopped herself. She knew pushing too hard would only make Mitchell dig his heels in deeper. Instead, she nodded curtly and left the office, her mind racing. Something about this situation didn't sit right with her. Over the past few months, she'd noticed a pattern. Reports involving minority neighborhoods often got brushed aside or labeled as low priority. It was frustrating, to say the least. As she returned to her desk, Lisa decided to do a little digging of her own. She pulled up recent incident logs and cross-referenced them with anonymous tips submitted to the department's hotline. Sure enough, there were several mentions of suspicious activity near the warehouse Marcus had described. Some callers claimed to have seen vans coming and going at odd hours, while others reported hearing loud noises late at night. None of these reports had been followed up on. Lisa leaned back in her chair, deep in thought. There was definitely something worth investigating here. But if she wanted to get anywhere, she'd have to work carefully and quietly. For now, she resolved to keep an eye on the situation and gather more information before taking it to anyone else. Later that evening, Elijah Johnson arrived home after a long day at work. As a successful businessman and philanthropist, Elijah spent most of his time juggling meetings, charity events, and community initiatives. Despite his busy schedule, he always made time for his family, and tonight was no different. He greeted Marcus warmly as he walked into the kitchen, where his son was helping prepare dinner. "How was your day?" Elijah asked, loosening his tie. Marcus hesitated, unsure whether to bring up his visit to the police station. "It was okay," he said finally, avoiding eye contact. "Nothing special." Elijah raised an eyebrow, sensing that something was off. "You sure? You seem distracted." "It's nothing," Marcus mumbled, stirring a pot of soup. But after a moment, he changed his mind. "Actually, Dad, something did happen. I saw something weird last night, a couple of guys loading crates into a van near that old warehouse on Maple Street. I went to the police station to report it, but the captain acted like I was wasting his time." Elijah's expression darkened. "What? Did you tell him what you saw? Did you show him proof?" "Yes," Marcus exclaimed, pulling out his phone to show his father the photos. But he didn't care. He just brushed me off like it wasn't important. Elijah stared at the images, his jaw tightening. "This is unacceptable," he said firmly. "No one should be treated that way, especially not my son. Tomorrow I'll call the mayor and find out what's going on with that department. If they're not doing their jobs properly, someone needs to hold them accountable." Marcus looked at his father, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time that day. "Do you think it'll make a difference?" "It has to," Elijah replied, his voice steady. "If we don't stand up for what's right, who will?" Unbeknownst to both of them, Elijah's actions would soon reveal a shocking truth, one that would shake the foundation of trust between the police department and the community it served. But for now, the pieces were still falling into place. each one bringing them closer to uncovering the full picture. As Marcus finished cooking dinner, he couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. Whether it was good or bad, he wasn't sure. All he knew was that staying silent wasn't an option anymore, not for him, and not for anyone else who had been ignored for too long. The next morning, Marcus and Jamal met up at their usual spot near the park. Both of them carried backpacks filled with supplies, notebooks, snacks, and a camera they'd borrowed from Jamal's older brother. They were determined to investigate the warehouse on their own, even though it felt risky. Marcus had spent the night researching online, trying to make sense of the markings he'd seen on the crates in his photos. He didn't find much, but one symbol, a triangle with 3 dots inside, looked familiar. It matched a logo used by a company that had been linked to illegal arms trafficking in other states. This could be serious, Marcus said as he showed Jamal the information on his phone. If these guys are smuggling weapons, we need to figure out who they're working for. Jamal nodded, his expression serious. Yeah, but how do we prove it? We can't just walk up to the warehouse and ask questions. We don't have to, Marcus replied. We'll watch from a distance, take more pictures, and see if we can follow the van if it shows up again. If we gather enough evidence, someone will have to listen to us. With their plan set, the two friends headed toward the warehouse. They stayed cautious, sticking to side streets and avoiding open areas where they might be spotted. When they arrived, they found a good hiding spot behind some bushes about 50 yards away from the building. The place looked abandoned just like before, but there was something unsettling about the silence. It felt too quiet, almost unnatural. For hours, nothing happened. The sun climbed higher in the sky and the air grew warmer. Just as Marcus started to think their trip was a waste of time, a white van pulled into view. It was the same one he'd seen the night he took the photos. 2 men stepped out, both wearing dark jackets and baseball caps. They moved quickly, opening the back doors of the van and unloading more crates. Stay low, Marcus whispered to Jamal, pulling out the camera. He snapped several shots, zooming in to capture the details of the crates and the men's faces. One of the men glanced around nervously, scanning the area. For a moment, Marcus froze, worried they'd been spotted, but the man turned back to his work without noticing anything. After loading the crates into the warehouse, the men climbed back into the van and drove off. Marcus and Jamal waited a few minutes before heading closer to the building. They peeked through a cracked window, careful not to touch anything. Inside, they saw stacks of crates piled neatly against the walls. Some of them were open, revealing what looked like metal parts wrapped in plastic. I think you're right, Jamal said quietly. This doesn't look like normal stuff. What should we do now? We need to get this evidence to someone who will believe us, Marcus replied. But it can't be Captain Mitchell. I don't trust him. As they left the warehouse, Marcus remembered Detective Lisa Monroe from the police station. She had seemed different from the others, more willing to listen. He decided to reach out to her directly, hoping she'd take their findings seriously. Back at the police station, Lisa Monroe was reviewing the notes she'd gathered about the warehouse. Her instincts told her something was wrong, but without solid proof, she couldn't justify launching an official investigation. That's when she received a call from an unknown number. Detective Monroe? A voice asked hesitantly. Yes, this is she, Lisa replied. Who am I speaking with? It's Marcus Johnson. I'm the guy who reported suspicious activity near the warehouse yesterday. Lisa sat up straighter, her interest piqued. Oh, right. What can I do for you, Marcus? I've got more evidence, Marcus explained. My friend and I went back to the warehouse today, and we saw the same van and men loading crates. We took pictures and got close enough to see what's inside. I think it's connected to illegal arms trafficking. Lisa listened carefully, jotting down notes. That's a serious accusation. Are you sure about what you saw? Yes, Marcus said firmly, and I'm not making this up. You can check the photos yourself. All right, Lisa said after a pause. Send me the photos and I'll look into it. But be careful, Marcus. If these people are involved in something illegal, they won't hesitate to hurt anyone who gets in their way. I know, Marcus replied. Thanks for listening, Detective. After hanging up, Lisa opened the email Marcus sent her. The photos were clear, showing the van, the men, and the contents of the crates. She recognized the triangular logo immediately. It matched reports she'd read about a criminal organization operating across state lines. This was bigger than she'd anticipated. Determined to act, Lisa brought the evidence to Internal Affairs, a division within the police department responsible for investigating misconduct among officers. She explained her findings and expressed concerns about why Captain Mitchell had dismissed Marcus's initial report. At first, the officials were skeptical, but Lisa's persistence paid off. They agreed to look into the matter further, assigning a team to monitor the warehouse discreetly. Meanwhile, Elijah Johnson was busy preparing for a charity gala hosted by the mayor. As a prominent donor, he was expected to attend and speak about the importance of supporting public services, including law enforcement. But Elijah couldn't shake the conversation he'd had with Marcus the previous night. Something about the captain's dismissive attitude bothered him deeply. At the event, Elijah mingled with other guests, exchanging pleasantries and discussing community issues. During a lull in the conversation, he struck up a chat with a woman named Patricia, who worked as a journalist covering local politics. She mentioned recent budget cuts affecting public safety programs, which caught Elijah's attention. "How bad are the cuts?" Elijah asked, frowning. "Pretty bad," Patricia replied. "Some departments are struggling to keep basic operations running. A lot of them rely on private donations to stay afloat." Elijah nodded thoughtfully. "I've contributed to the police department's funding myself. Do you know how my donations are being used?" Patricia shrugged. "Not specifically, but I imagine they go toward equipment upgrades and training programs." "Why do you ask?" "No reason," Elijah said, though his mind was racing. He excused himself politely and stepped outside to make a call. Back at his office, his assistant confirmed that his latest donation had been processed and allocated to the police department. Satisfied but still uneasy, Elijah decided to dig deeper. He requested detailed financial records related to the department, wanting to ensure his money was being used effectively. Days passed, and tensions in the town began to rise. Rumors spread about increased police presence near the warehouse, though no arrests were made. Marcus and Jamal kept a safe distance, knowing they'd already risked enough. They trusted Lisa to handle the situation, but they couldn't help feeling anxious. What if the criminals discovered they were being watched? One evening, as Marcus scrolled through news articles on his laptop, he stumbled upon a report about Elijah's contributions to the police department. His eyes widened as he read about how his father's donations had helped fund improvements over the years. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. "Jamal," Marcus called out, waving his friend over. "You won't believe this. My dad's been funding the police department this whole time. That's why they're so desperate to keep things under control." Jamal stared at him, stunned. "Wait, does your dad know how they treated you?" "No," Marcus said, shaking his head. "And I'm not sure how he'll react when he finds out." Unbeknownst to Marcus, Elijah was already starting to piece things together. The financial records he'd requested revealed discrepancies in how funds were distributed. Certain areas of the department received significantly less support than others, particularly those serving minority communities. Elijah's suspicions grew stronger with each passing day. He realized that his generosity had inadvertently masked deeper problems within the system, problems that directly affected people, like his own son. Determined to make things right, Elijah vowed to use his influence to demand accountability and push for meaningful change. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, the stage was set for a confrontation that would expose the truth and challenge the status quo. For Marcus, Jamal, Lisa, and Elijah, the road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Staying silent was no longer an option. The tension in the town was growing thicker with each passing day. Marcus and Jamal had kept a low profile since handing over their evidence to Detective Lisa Monroe, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen. Every time they passed the warehouse on Maple Street, they noticed more police cars patrolling the area. It was clear that Lisa's efforts were starting to pay off, but the two friends still worried that the criminals might catch wind of the investigation. One afternoon, while hanging out at Jamal's house, Marcus received a call from Lisa. His heart skipped a beat as he answered. "Hello?" he said, trying to sound calm. "Marcus, it's Detective Monroe," Lisa replied. Her voice was serious, but there was a hint of urgency in her tone. "I need to talk to you and your friend. Can you meet me at the station tomorrow?" "Sure," Marcus said quickly. "Is everything okay?" "I'll explain everything when I see you," Lisa said. "Just be careful until then." Marcus hung up and turned to Jamal, who was sitting across the room playing video games. "That was Lisa," Marcus said. "She wants us to go to the station tomorrow. Something's up." Jamal paused his game and looked at Marcus, his expression tense. "You think she found something?" "I don't know," Marcus admitted. "But whatever it is, it can't be good." The next morning, Marcus and Jamal arrived at the police station, their nerves on edge. They were ushered into a small meeting room where Lisa was waiting for them. She greeted them warmly but got straight to the point. "First, I want to thank you both for coming forward," Lisa began. "Your evidence has been incredibly helpful. We've been monitoring the warehouse and we've identified the group operating there. They're part of a larger criminal organization involved in illegal arms trafficking." Marcus felt a mix of relief and unease. "So what happens now?" he asked. "We're planning a raid," Lisa explained. "But it's going to take time to gather enough evidence to make sure everyone involved is caught. In the meantime, I need you two to stay safe. If these people suspect they're being watched, they could become dangerous." Jamal nodded. "We'll be careful. But what about Captain Mitchell? Does he know what's going on?" Lisa hesitated, her expression darkening. "That's another issue we're dealing with. Internal Affairs is looking into why Captain Mitchell dismissed your report so quickly. There are concerns about how certain cases involving minority communities are handled in this department." Marcus clenched his fists, anger bubbling inside him. "So, it wasn't just me? He ignores other people too." "I'm afraid so," Lisa said softly. "But things are starting to change. Your courage has opened the door for a lot of important conversations." Back at Elijah Johnson's office, the pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. After days of digging through financial records, Elijah had uncovered troubling patterns. Funds meant to support community outreach programs and improve services in underserved neighborhoods were being redirected elsewhere. Worse still, some officers, including Captain Mitchell, had close ties to individuals implicated in corruption scandals. Elijah sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He had always believed his donations would help bridge gaps between law enforcement and the community, but now he realized how deeply flawed the system truly was. The knowledge weighed heavily on him. He knew he had to act, not just for himself, but for his son and others like him. He picked up the phone and called the mayor's office. "This is Elijah Johnson," he said when the assistant answered. "I need to speak with the mayor immediately. It's urgent." Within an hour, Elijah was sitting across from Mayor Patricia Klein in her office. She listened intently as he laid out his findings, her expression growing increasingly grim. "This is unacceptable," she said when he finished. "If what you're saying is true, we have a major problem on our hands." "It's true," Elijah replied firmly, "and I won't stand by while my contributions are misused. I want answers, and I want action. The people in this town deserve better." Patricia nodded. "You have my word. I'll launch a full investigation into the department's finances and operations. But this won't be easy. There will be resistance." "I understand," Elijah said, "but if we don't start somewhere, nothing will ever change." Meanwhile, Captain Harold Mitchell was starting to feel the pressure. Rumors about Internal Affairs investigation had spread throughout the station, and several officers had been questioned about their handling of recent cases. Mitchell tried to brush it off, telling himself it was all just speculation. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. When Lisa Monroe approached him later that day, his defenses went up immediately. "What do you want now, Lisa?" he snapped. "We need to talk," Lisa said calmly, though her eyes were sharp. "Internal Affairs has raised concerns about your decision to dismiss Marcus Johnson's report. Do you care to explain yourself?" Mitchell crossed his arms, his face hardening. I already told you it was a waste of resources. Nothing came of it, did it? That's not the point, Lisa shot back. The point is, you ignored credible evidence because of who brought it to you. That's not how this job works. Captain? I didn't ignore anything, Mitchell protested, his voice rising. I made a judgment call based on experience. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, you're making excuses, Lisa said firmly. And until this investigation is over, I suggest you tread carefully. Mitchell glared at her but said nothing. As Lisa walked away, he felt a knot tightening in his stomach. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure of his footing. That evening, Elijah returned home to find Marcus waiting for him in the living room. His son looked nervous, holding a tablet in his hands. Dad, we need to talk, Marcus said as Elijah sat down. What's going on? Elijah asked, concerned. I found out something, Marcus began. You've been funding the police department for years, right? Well, I think your money might have been used to cover up problems instead of fixing them. Elijah sighed, rubbing his temples. I know, Marcus, I've been looking into it myself. What I've discovered, it's not good. So, what are you going to do about it? Marcus pressed. I'm working with the mayor to launch an investigation, Elijah explained. But it's going to take time. People won't like having their mistakes exposed. Marcus nodded slowly. I just wish they'd taken me seriously from the beginning. Elijah reached out and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. I'm sorry they didn't, Marcus. But you did the right thing by speaking up. Sometimes change starts with one person refusing to stay silent. As the days passed, the town buzzed with anticipation. News of Elijah's involvement in the investigation leaked to the public, sparking outrage among residents who felt marginalized by the system. Protests erupted outside the police station, demanding accountability and reform. Local media covered the story extensively, shining a spotlight on years of neglect and bias. Detective Lisa Monroe worked tirelessly behind the scenes, coordinating with internal affairs and preparing for the raid on the warehouse. She knew the stakes were high, but she also knew they couldn't afford to fail. This was their chance to prove that justice could still prevail, even in a broken system. Captain Mitchell, on the other hand, found himself increasingly isolated. Officers who had once supported him began distancing themselves, fearing guilt by association. When Internal Affairs called him in for a formal interview, he knew his career was on the line. For Marcus and Jamal, the wait was agonizing. They wanted to believe that things would get better, but they'd seen enough to know that change didn't come easily. Still, they held on to hope that maybe, just maybe, their actions would inspire others to stand up and demand better. Little did they know, the raid was only days away and its outcome would send shockwaves through the entire town. The night of the raid arrived and the air was thick with anticipation. Detective Lisa Monroe stood at the front of a briefing room filled with officers dressed in tactical gear. Maps of the warehouse and its surroundings were spread across the bow table, marked with red circles indicating entry points and potential escape routes. The team had spent hours planning every detail, knowing that one wrong move could jeopardize everything. We've got enough evidence to confirm illegal arms trafficking, Lisa said, her voice steady but firm. These people are dangerous, so stay sharp. Our goal is to arrest everyone involved and seize the weapons, no mistakes. The officers nodded, their faces serious. For many of them, this operation was personal. They'd heard stories about how cases involving minority communities were often ignored or mishandled. Now they had a chance to prove that justice wasn't just for some, it was for everyone. As the team prepared to leave, Lisa pulled Marcus and Jamal aside. She had insisted on keeping them informed, knowing how much they'd risked to bring this case to light. Stay close to home tonight, she told them. Things might get messy and I don't want you two anywhere near the warehouse. We understand, Marcus replied, though his heart raced with nerves. Just be careful, okay? Lisa gave him a small smile. I will. Trust me. We're ending this. The raid began just after midnight. Under the cover of darkness, police vehicles surrounded the warehouse, their headlights cutting through the gloom. Officers moved swiftly, breaking down doors and flooding the building. Inside, chaos erupted as the criminals scrambled to flee. Some tried to fight back, but the police were ready. Within minutes, several men were handcuffed and led. Outside, their faces pale with shock. Lisa stayed focused, directing her team as they searched the warehouse. Stacks of crates lined the walls, each one packed with illegal firearms and ammunition. It was worse than anyone had imagined, enough weapons to arm an entire gang. As the evidence was loaded into trucks, Lisa felt a surge of satisfaction. This was it. They'd done it. But the victory came with complications. One of the arrested men was identified as a high-ranking member of the criminal organization, and during questioning, he revealed names of individuals connected to the operation, including corrupt officials within the police department. The web of corruption ran deeper than anyone had anticipated. Back at the station, Captain Harold Mitchell sat alone in his office, staring blankly at the wall. News of the raid had spread quickly, and whispers about his involvement in covering up. Similar cases grew louder. Internal affairs investigators had already questioned him twice, and each session left him feeling more exposed. When Detective Lisa Monroe walked in unannounced, Mitchell flinched. He hadn't expected her to confront him again so soon. "What do you want now?" he asked, his voice tinged with bitterness. "You know exactly why I'm here," Lisa replied, closing the door behind her. "The man we arrested tonight named names, Captain. Yours was one of them." Mitchell's face turned pale. "That's ridiculous," he stammered. "I didn't have anything to do with those people." "Then explain why you dismissed Marcus Johnson's report," Lisa shot back. "Why did you ignore credible evidence instead of investigating it?" I made a mistake," Mitchell shouted, standing abruptly. "You think I wanted this? You think I knew what was going on?" "It doesn't matter what you wanted," Lisa said coldly. "What matters is that your actions allowed criminals to operate unchecked. That's not something you can brush off." Mitchell sank back into his chair, defeated. He knew there was no way out. The truth was catching up to him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Elijah Johnson sat in his study late that night, unable to sleep. His phone buzzed constantly with updates from Mayor Patricia Cline and the media. The raid had been a success, but the fallout was only beginning. Elijah scrolled through news articles detailing arrests and revelations of corruption within the IM police department. Each headline hit him like a punch to the gut. He thought about Marcus and how the system had failed him, not just once, but repeatedly. Elijah had always believed in giving back to the community, but now he realized that charity alone wasn't enough. Real change required accountability, transparency, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. The next morning, Elijah called a press conference. Reporters gathered eagerly, sensing that something big was about to happen. Standing at the podium, Elijah took a deep breath before speaking. "For years I've supported the police department because I believed it was the right thing to do," he began. "But recent events have shown me that my contributions have been used to mask deeper problems within the system. Corruption and bias have gone unchecked, hurting the very people I hope to help." His words sent ripples through the crowd. Cameras flashed as reporters scribbled notes furiously. Elijah continued, his voice growing stronger. "I won't stand by while injustice prevails. I'm working with city officials to implement reforms that prioritize transparency and equality. We owe it to our community to do better." The audience erupted into applause, and Elijah felt a flicker of hope. Change wouldn't come overnight, but this was a start. Marcus and Jamal watched the press conference together, their eyes glued to the screen. "Your dad's amazing," Jamal said, shaking his head in awe. "He's trying," Marcus replied softly. "But it's not just about him. It's about all of us standing up and saying enough is enough." Jamal nodded. "Yeah, but still, what you did, Marcus, you showed everyone that even when the odds are against you, you can make a difference." Marcus smiled faintly. He wanted to believe that things would improve, but part of him remained cautious. He'd seen too much to trust blindly. Still, he couldn't deny the sense of pride swelling inside him. For the first time in a long time, he felt like his voice mattered. In the days that followed, the town buzzed with activity. Protests turned into rallies, with residents demanding systemic changes. Local leaders held meetings to discuss reform plans, and Elijah became a key figure in shaping new policies. Schools organized workshops to teach students about civic responsibility, while community groups worked to rebuild trust between law enforcement and marginalized neighborhoods. The police station sweeping changes were underway. Captain Mitchell resigned under mounting pressure, and new leadership took over, promising to prioritize accountability and fairness. Officers who had resisted reform were reassigned or let go, making room for fresh perspectives. Detective Lisa Monroe played a crucial role in rebuilding the department's reputation. She worked closely with Elijah and other community leaders to develop training programs aimed at addressing implicit bias and improving relations with residents. Slowly but surely, the cracks in the system began to heal. For Marcus and Jamal, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. They went back to school and work, but their experience lingered in their minds. They often talked about starting a youth initiative to encourage others to speak out against injustice. "We could call it Voices for Change," and Jamal suggested one afternoon. "I like that," Marcus said, smiling. "It's about time people started listening." As they walked home together, the sun setting behind them, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he knew that staying silent wasn't an option, not for him, and not for anyone else who had been ignored for too long. Months had passed since the raid on the warehouse, and the town was slowly beginning to heal. The scandal that rocked the police department had forced everyone, residents, officials, and law enforcement, to confront uncomfortable truths about systemic racism and corruption. While the wounds were still fresh, there was a sense of cautious optimism in the air. People were talking openly about issues they'd once avoided, and for the first time in years it felt like real change was possible. Elijah Johnson had thrown himself into his work, using his influence to push for reforms that would ensure accountability within the police department. He partnered with community leaders, activists, and city officials to create programs aimed at rebuilding trust between law enforcement and marginalized neighborhoods. One of these initiatives was a mentorship program pairing young people with officers who were committed to positive change. Elijah believed that fostering understanding between generations could help break down barriers. Marcus watched his father's efforts with pride, but also a touch of skepticism. He admired Elijah's determination, but he knew better than anyone how hard it was to undo years of damage. Still, he couldn't deny the progress being made. Police officers were now attending workshops on implicit bias, and new policies required all reports to be thoroughly investigated, regardless of who filed them. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. At school, Marcus and Jamal launched their initiative, Voices for Change. They started small, organizing meetings in the library after class where students could share their experiences with injustice or discrimination. At first, only a handful of kids showed up, but word spread quickly. Soon, dozens of students were participating, eager to talk about the challenges they faced and brainstorm ways to address them. The group decided to take their message beyond the school walls. With help from teachers and parents, they planned a community event called Youth Speak Out. Flyers went up around town, inviting residents of all ages to come listen to young voices and join the conversation. The response was overwhelming. On the day of the event, the local park was packed with people ready to hear what the next generation had to say. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stepped onto the makeshift stage, his heart pounding. Looking out at the crowd, he saw familiar faces: his dad, Jamal, Lisa Monroe, even some of the officers he'd met during the investigation. Taking a deep breath, he began. "When I tried to report what I saw that night, I didn't expect anyone to listen," Marcus said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I thought my age, my race, and where I came from would make me invisible. But I learned something important. Staying silent doesn't fix anything. Speaking up does." He paused, letting his words sink in. "We're here today because we believe things can get better. Not just for us, but for everyone. Change starts when we stop pretending problems don't exist and start working together to solve them. That's what Voices for Change is all about." The crowd erupted into applause, and Marcus felt a warmth spread through him. For so long he'd doubted whether his actions mattered. Now, standing in front of hundreds of people who shared his vision, he realized they did. Detective Lisa Monroe continued to play a key role in reshaping the police department. Under her guidance, officers received training not just on technical skills, but also on empathy and cultural awareness. She worked closely with Elijah to implement transparency measures, such as publishing monthly reports detailing how complaints were handled and sharing data on arrests and investigations. One evening, as she walked through the station, Lisa noticed a group of younger officers huddled around a bulletin board. They were discussing a recent case involving vandalism at a community center. Instead of rushing to assign blame, they were brainstorming ways to involve residents in solving the problem. Lisa smiled to herself. These were the kinds of conversations she wanted to see more of, ones rooted in collaboration rather than suspicion. Later that week, Lisa visited Marcus and Jamal at their school to thank them for their courage. "What you two did inspired a lot of people," she told them, "including me. We just did what we thought was right." Marcus replied, shrugging modestly. "Well, keep doing it," Lisa said with a grin. "The world needs more people like you." As winter approached, the town held its annual holiday festival. Streets were lined with twinkling lights and the smell of hot cocoa filled the air. Families gathered in the square to enjoy music, food, and festivities. For the first time in years, the atmosphere felt genuinely joyful. There was still work to be done, but for one night, everyone allowed themselves to celebrate how far they'd come. Elijah stood beside Marcus, watching the crowd with a contented smile. "You know," he said, leaning down to speak softly to his son, "none of this would have happened without you. You took a stand when it mattered most." Marcus looked up at his dad, feeling a mix of emotions. "It wasn't just me, Dad. It was everyone. The officers who cared, the people who spoke out, and even the ones who listened. We're all part of this." Elijah nodded, his eyes shining with pride. "That's true. And no matter what happens, next, remember this. Change isn't always fast, but it's always worth fighting for." In the weeks that followed, Marcus and Jamal expanded Voices for Change to include other schools in the area. They organized debates, art projects, and volunteer opportunities, encouraging young people to engage with their community in meaningful ways. Their efforts caught the attention of local media, and soon stories about their initiative appeared in newspapers and on TV. One day, while scrolling through social media, Marcus stumbled upon a comment thread discussing their work. Someone had posted a photo of the holiday festival with the caption, "This year feels different, like maybe we're finally heading in the right direction." Dozens of replies echoed the sentiment, each one filled with hope and gratitude. Marcus felt a lump rise in his throat. He hadn't expected his journey to inspire others, but seeing the impact gave him strength. He realized that while the fight for justice was far from over, every step forward mattered. Every voice counted. By spring, the town looked almost unrecognizable. New murals celebrating diversity adorned buildings, and community gardens flourished in empty lots. Residents volunteered side by side, planting flowers, painting fences, and cleaning parks. Even the police station had transformed, with officers hosting regular meet and greets to build connections with the people they served. For Marcus, the changes were bittersweet. He was proud of what they'd accomplished, but he knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. There would still be setbacks, moments of frustration, and battles yet to be fought. But he also knew that giving up wasn't an option, not for him, and not for anyone else who dreamed of a fairer, kinder world. As he walked home one evening, the setting sun casting golden light across the streets, Marcus felt a quiet confidence settle over him. The scars of the past remained, but so did the lessons he'd learned. He'd discovered the power of speaking up, the importance of standing together, and the resilience of a community determined to rise above its struggles. And as he glanced back at the revitalized neighborhood behind him, Marcus allowed himself to feel hopeful, not because everything was perfect, but because people were finally working together towards something better.